Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. Today's episode is one that speaks straight to the heart of creativity, resilience, and storytelling. I'm honored to be joined by Seth Voorhees, an author whose work explores transformation, identity, and the power of narrative to heal and inspire. Seth's writing invites us into worlds where resilience and imagination converge, offering both reflection and empowerment. His journey as an author is not only about crafting stories, but about restoring storytelling as a vital force in our lives. So, Seth, welcome to the show. It's a joy to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and it's such a beautiful day too for December here anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of rainy out here in Oregon today, but I'm glad that you're enjoying some nice December weather. Can you share the origin story of your journey into authorship and what first compelled you to write?
Well, being a dark fiction author, kind of a love of horror, and being a millennial, I feel like my journey started with a lot of authors in my age group, and that's with Goosebumps, the original, really kids version of horror that your my parents were, allowing me to read at a young age, and definitely got hooked into them. And I remember at one point, I was so obsessed with it that I wrote down on a piece of paper like 40, 50 titles of books that I thought would sound good. Now, obviously, being at a young age, I didn't really have the discipline to commit to it. So most of it was titles and maybe a few thoughts here and there. But that's what really got it started, what got going. And then as I got older, just being able to go off of R.L. Stein, then, adjust and adapt to other authors like Stephen King and seeing how he did some writing. And then I read I Am Legend. That was such a classic for those who haven't read it. That there's so much to that story. And so I'd say that's really where it began. And then for writing purposes, I really didn't start it until high school. When my senior year of high school is when I wrote my first actual novel. It was kind of a short novel. It was called The Chronicles of Clark. And looking back at it, obviously it could have been better, but it was still good. It's what got the ball rolling.
There's always one of those in all of our histories as
Oh, yeah.
writers. So, your work, obviously, as you said, explores some of the darker themes, and resilience, identity, and transformation almost always come up in those kind of stories. So, how did your personal experience shape that creative lens?
One of the big themes that really started with my life is resilience wise. Anyway, I had a single mother, I had a sister, I didn't have a father growing up. And so I either had my mother being able to teach me as much as she could, but wasn't around as much because she was a stay at home mom. And then I was always behind with the boys since I didn't have a father to teach me anything. And so resilience wise, I just had to kind of learn things as I went. I had to learn by a lot of trial and error. I kind of used to like to joke. I learned to use a screwdriver when everyone could build an engine, and I always had to play catch up. And so that really shaped my identity at an early age. Now, and in regards to taken off of me though, once I got into college, I really got into sociology and psychology, which is my degrees from Black Hill State University. And I got into social work and the residential field working with primarily adolescents. And I'll tell you what, that changed my whole perspective because I thought, I had it hard and I thought I went through tough things. And then you realize, compared to some other of the stories and with the youth I had to work with, I still had it easy growing up. And so definitely all of that is what compels and shapes my stories. Everything from spirituality to, being able to bounce back to grief and loss and, the whole gambit really. Um, and I'm grateful for all of it because it's helped me not just shape myself and, adapt to who I am now. Because I'm sure just like you and everyone else, the writer and the person I was at 20 was not the same at 30, and now I just turned 41 actually yesterday. So that whole change is still relevant and I still recognize it every single day. But yeah, I definitely try to apply what I've learned from those I've worked with and my friends and family, all of them into creating the right characters, the right experiences, and just delving into things that I maybe wasn't too familiar with. Sometimes you got to do research and ask a few friends. I have a lot of beta readers who I have to ask once in a while, like, does this seem real? Does this seem truthful? Because I think as authors, that's what we're here to do in our stories. We're writing truth and we're writing hope through, of course, being a dark fiction author, absurd stories and situations that obviously aren't real and all the time. It's like it's been said, sometimes you have to have more truth than myth and legend, but it just depends on the day.
Well, happy belated birthday to you. I'm
Thank
also
you.
a 1984 original.
Yeah. We're the best years, right? That's the best
I
generation,
think
yeah.
so, but I'm about 6 months older than you. My birthday's in June, so,
Alright,
but I completely relate to that, and that is definitely true. These different emotional gambits that we use in these stories to kind of give a morale so that people can understand that even though you might be going through a monstrous situation, you can get through it with different kinds of coping skills, and I think that's one of the best things that we can do, especially as horror writers.
agree.
What was the turning point when you realized that storytelling was not just a passion, but a vocation?
So, for me, I have a interesting journey. So, I told you how I started writing, when I was kind of 17, 18 in that area, and I wrote for a while until I got into college, and then I discovered, like I said, the field of sociology, psychology, and kinda delved into other things. So, my love for creative fiction writing took a back turn, and it wasn't until, let's see, I was about 30, so it was about 10 years ago that I really just one day, it just kinda hit me all of a sudden. That's like, I haven't written anything substantial in quite a while, and I remember, so for those of you who don't remember the swine flu pandemic, when that pandemic happened, I remember going on for a walk, and I had this thought of, for a story, what would it be like to be immune to a virus and then you had to watch everything kinda get destroyed and ruined all around you while you were perfectly safe? And that thought stuck with me. And then, at the time, I was saying 10 years ago, so that was when Fear the Walking Dead and the Walking Dead TV shows were just, they were the hit. They were the thing. And I just all of a sudden, I remembered that one thought from all those years ago, and then I was thinking, "Man, I'd love to write a story about zombies and horror again, but then do it with a twist." And that's how Immune, my very first novel, kinda came to be about, and I really took it serious. One of the interesting things, though, is, like I said, since I took a break, I had to relearn everything. So not only was I starting to write this book, but I then went to the bookstores and I checked out, like, Stephen King's on writing and other, helpful tips. There was one called The First 5 Pages, stories like that, and I had to really get reintroduced to it, and I just kinda sat there while I was typing and writing the story just thinking, "Man, why did I take a break from this? I need to reconnect." The more I just kept writing, the more I kept going and so forth and so forth, and so it really didn't take very long at all once I started writing that story. It just took off, and I was like, "Man, I need to get back into this. I really do." Because always enjoyed it. I was always an imaginative child and a very creative person. I remember in, I think it was like 2nd, 3rd grade, we had I don't even know what the project was or the assignment. It was something to do with creative writing or probably wasn't even creative writing because it was like 3rd grade, but I remember writing a story about being on a playground, and the playground was a metaphor for childhood, and I wanted to leave the playground to go to the other side, which was adulthood, but I had a friend who wouldn't go with me, and I'm sure it didn't read that great. In fact, one of the, teacher's aides said, "You have a lot of obviously sloppy grammar and punctuation and spelling, but we get what you were saying." So, yeah, it was at an early age, and, yeah, once I delved back into it, it just took off.
So, you've cultivated a readership that resonates deeply with your themes. What does that connection look like in practice, and what stories from readers have moved you the most?
Let's see, well, I'm gonna answer that 2 ways. So, the audience I try to get is really in the beginning, anyone that could just relate to the themes and the subject matter. I mean, being dark fiction and horror, obviously you wanna kinda stick with your group, but obviously you also want other people to enjoy the stories. So, like with Immune, I have a wonderful LGBTQ romance that goes on in there, so that branches out from horror. I have a lot of conversations with spirituality, alcoholism, and I have a few other stories where similar themes come in as well, like in Mid Glow and The Interim. But yeah, definitely just trying to connect, I think, on that emotional human level so I can draw pretty much anyone reader wise. And, the stories that so I'm even though I read a lot of horror, I also read a lot of nonfiction. And the stories that actually move me the most are not fiction, it's the nonfiction, like tales of survival, shipwreck. We had a wonderful opportunity here in South Dakota. When I want to say I was in high school, we met Jack Vandergeese, who was one of only 8 people to escape from Buchenwald concentration camp. And he had the book, Was God on Vacation? And he came to our school and he met with us, and I got a book signed from him. And then, you got Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, so it's really those kind of stories that really I would say move me the most and actually get me thinking deeper about just who I am, where I'm going and what I could apply to other stories like fiction. Because I feel like with fiction, I'm almost trying to escape some of that more serious, deep stuff, even though you still have to write about it. So yeah, in order to get that connection, I have to read nonfiction, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So, writing can be both solitary and communal. How do you see technology and digital platforms enhancing the way that authors connect with their audiences today?
I mean, so much. In fact, really, to be honest, I think there's so much technology, whether it be especially social media, where it actually can keep you from writing. So you definitely need balance between the two. Definitely. You need to sit down and have your time during the day when it's like, okay, this is my writing time. And so for me, that's early in the morning. I'm a morning bug. I won't write past 3 p.m. I have a rule of that. My imagination is gone at that point. So I think being able to balance it and divide it up during the day is very important. But also on the same token, you do need a team, you can't, especially if you're a self-published author, and I'm trying to go the traditional route, but I've been a self-published author for quite some time now, and you definitely still need a team to help you get the word out because you can't do it all, there's not enough time in the day, especially if you have a job like I do. In some cases, a few years ago, I had 2 jobs. So, even though solitary is part of being an author, you also gotta learn to get out of your comfort zone and learn to break out of it when you can. So it's a fine balance, but I think social media definitely gets you out there with your books. Nowadays, though, everyone is just so obsessed with AI and making sure nothing is AI. I would say that that has kind of made it a little more challenging for authors as well. Because like, when you do a
Made it
query.
incredibly toxic. It's made it
Oh,
really
yeah.
toxic.
When you do, like, a query letter to an agent, their questions are, how much of your script is AI? Did you use AI for this? Did you use AI for that? And also too, I think as much as you wanna use technology and things like social media, you also gotta really, take it with a grain of salt too, because there can be a lot of negative people on it as well. I remember once on Facebook, I think it was the interim, I did an advertisement real quick with the cover and, the person was like, "I don't love your cover, so therefore your book probably stinks. All your writing's gonna stink. I'm not gonna follow you. I'm not gonna buy any of your books." And it's like, "Okay, geez, you didn't like the cover. That's all you gotta say." Like, good grief. So yeah, so
My work
yes,
isn't for you. Feel free to see yourself out the door.
right? It was like, geez. So, yeah, a lot of balance.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. You really have to have a thick skin if you want to get in this industry. That was the way it was before, and it has only gotten that much more serious.
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a good person give me advice. He said, Seth, you need to look at your life as an author from 2 perspectives. One is the author who hopes that everyone enjoys your reading, buys your book, right? And, loves your stories, love what you're doing. Then you also have to have the business side who kind of thinks, once you bought my book, I don't care.
Right?
It's like, well, okay.
That's some easy advice right there when people were boycotting the NWA's first debut album and everybody wanted to burn it. He was like, "They're paying for it to do that, so who cares?"
Right. Yeah. Once you buy it.
Like, "Okay, if you wanna waste your money that way, but I'm the one that's profiting at the end of the day. All you're saying is you hate me and you're paying me for that hatred." And that's kinda how it
Exactly.
works. But moving on to my next question, creativity and healing often intersect. in especially horror. So, how do you see literature functioning as both therapy and empowerment?
Wonderful question. So I kind of mentioned already the talk of spirituality and alcoholism, many things themes that I can relate to in my personal life and with among friends and family. And so like those themes come into my stories a lot just because, that's who I am by nature. I'm a very spiritual person now compared to how I was many years ago, my 20s. And being able to just really heal through my words is very therapeutic. That question, I really started thinking more about the book I'm currently writing right now, and it's called Figment of Caring. And it is a novel. I used to always stay away from the whole, write what you know, write what you know. And it's like, well, yeah, but what if I want to write about aliens? Like, I don't know anything about aliens. So I always stayed away from that. But I told you earlier how I've worked in residential field and mental health field, and I've always had many coworkers say, "Hey, Seth, you should take everything you've learned, everything you thought about, and put it in this book." And it took me a long time to figure out a story, and I eventually did, and I'm still in the middle of um, editorial process. So I have it done, but I'm still editing. But I touch on a lot of themes there, including things like secondary trauma, especially with staff over the years that me and them have experienced. Like, I'll give you a great example, and I have it in the book about a former staff member, like she couldn't for a while there, she couldn't hold her, nephew as a child because when the nephew would sit on her lap, she would immediately think of a client who got molested and had some bad things happen when sitting in the lap of uncles, and so it made her so uncomfortable, she couldn't hold her nephew, but it's like, okay, but, you still gotta show your nephew love and, that so many examples of things like that. So through writing, you can heal and make people aware of, like, that kind of trauma and plus other things in, that field. So that's been really helpful for me because I also had that kind of secondary trauma because when you deal with clients who've had abuse and, molestation and rape and, all these negative things, your mind changes, just like a firefighter, a police officer, a nurse, a doctor, your whole perspective on life changes. And you got to remember, okay, not everyone is having a horrible childhood. Not everyone is having this terrible life experience. Like, there are parents who are kind and loving and good. There are families that are healthy and, able to teach their youth and children coping skills, strategies, and, so I got to get out of that negative mindset. So that's the story that currently I would say has done the most healing in my regard, my case.
Many emerging authors face barriers in publishing. How do you uplift and amplify their work, and what advice would you share for them?
So, like I said, I'm trying to reach into the traditional route, which is not easy. You have to deal with a lot of rejection from agents, and they don't tell you why they rejected you, which maybe sometimes is a good thing, but sometimes you want to know why they reject you. So you gotta take that with a grain of salt. You gotta have thick skin and realize it's just part of the process. But in regards to the self-publishing route, the biggest thing is just think, well, one, trying to make sure no one takes you for your money. 'Cause there's just so many publishers out there, so many scammers who are just trying to take you for all the money you can and give you the the raw deal, the worst deal possible for your books. And I myself have had some issues. I had a publisher down the road with Immune and Midglow who I eventually had to part ways from and eventually got the rights back, which was good. And it took me a while to find the right self-publishing, which I did through Ingram Sparks, and the reason I like them so much is because 'cause they're, the main distributor and they have that buyback insurance, so your books can be in bookstores. So just I think learning from other authors too, like because from the longest time, I didn't know anything about that buyback insurance. I just thought, "Oh, you can self-publish a book and get into a bookstore. It's a real easy process." No, 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 no. It's not. There's that insurance I told you about, and, and then also a lot of people nowadays, they want to see you have a following. That's the other big thing I've noticed too. That's the other good advice is build a following so you can sell your books because that's what's actually going to sell 'em. I can't, everyone always says like, well, why do celebrities when they write out a book, they sell so many and they become a best-selling author so quickly? And I'm like, well, that doesn't mean their book's good. It just means they have a huge audience to buy the book. That's what it is. That's how it is so easy. And that's not easy to always build an audience, but it takes a lot of time and effort, and it's doable as long as you're willing to do it. So that'd be the next big advice is, yeah. And then also just be mindful of whose advice you take. So meet with fellow authors. Don't just Google answers. Go to book fairs. We have a wonderful one here in South Dakota every year. Go meet fellow people in the business and actually, hear from their ears and their mouths what the industry's like and what it can be done. So that requires a little more of that. Like I said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Get out of that isolation that we authors love so much.
So, shifting to another question, what role does storytelling play in shaping cultural memory and collective resilience?
Well, I think, for me anyway, so I call myself a Black Hills author a lot, and that's because I live in the Black Hills and I draw from a lot of my inspiration from the area. And anytime, like, I'm just going to use my life experience here. So I live in an area that has, so I'm in South Dakota, and we have our second highest population is Native American, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota Sioux. And there's, in our area, we're very close to legends like Crazy Horse and Red Cloud, and, a lot of those members who try, and a lot of boarding schools, and, just a lot of, and Wounded Knee. We're right close to Wounded Knee. So whenever I try to write my characters, especially if I have a native character, I always have to keep it in context of their culture and trying to make sure I don't represent it inappropriately or, anything like that. I have several beta readers where I'm like, hey, can you take a look at this and read? So you always want to show respect to all the cultures in your area and around. But, I write about it because it's part of my life, who I am and my experience. But I also want to be respectful. And I also want to paint the picture of those characters in a positive light and not the negative light that most people, well, I shouldn't say most people, sorry, excuse me, that some individuals in this world have, especially towards Native Americans, indigenous people in our society and in our culture. So for me, in my stories, I'm always trying to keep that narrative going on a positive front, like showing the ability for both sides to heal and connect and work together, come together, and yet also face the real challenges that are still going on. I mean, we still have a lot of racism towards those issues and a lot of distrust, and each side takes their turn trying to heal with each other, and then also trying to look at our own selves and say, okay, well, what's my part in making this worse, what's my part in making it better, and just working together. So for me anyway, that's how I focus on that. I really stick with my area and what I know.
I'm actually mixed indigenous. So when you said the two different sides, it's kind of a conflict for me because
Hmm.
I have Native American and I have European immigrant. And I
Yes.
actually have a distant African slave ancestor within that tree too. So I appear white to most people. And when I say this, they're like, wow. And I said, this is the reason why when we're approaching
Hmm.
topics like this, we really have to understand it really isn't always just this side and that side. That
Hmm.
is actually the basis of the American cultural melting pot, is that this is a country that was built on multiple lineages and different types of people, and on the backs of immigrants it was built. So, it
Hmm.
was taken from indigenous people and then built upon the backs of others who didn't ask to build it, and now we're in this position where people are looking at this and they're so divisive over it without realizing that the entire truth of this entire American project, the experiment, was to show that different religious, spiritual, and ethnic peoples could actually coexist and build a country that were supposed to be based on mutual respect and freedom. And this is a problem that we are facing across the board, but it's always nice when someone comes on the show and actually says, here I am, and I recognize that this is my part in this, but I want to respect the native culture. And also, this is an opportunity for me to tell everyone else about what it looks like to decolonize and to reconnect with your roots. So even though I am part European immigrant, I really actually do not empathize with their situation at all. And I say that in all honesty because this country was stolen. However, with that being said, if you want to continue to exist in America, you have to first respect the people that you stole it from and allow them to lead the way that the history of this country should be told, because so much has been lied about that they have been erased under. that has caused this disproportionate belief, such as even the Department of Human Security posting remigration. We are in a very volatile situation. And I really do commend you for being someone who stays connected with trying to learn directly from the indigenous about how to change those things. That's a little bit of a
Yeah,
side note, but
no worries.
um,
No, I agree with you.
so I had to use the opportunity to talk about it. And moving to my next question. So, sustaining a writing practice takes immense discipline. How do you stay inspired and grounded through those challenges?
Wonderful question. So, I do believe in that you need to try and have a writing goal every day. It's very easy to say, well, you need to have a certain word count, 2,000 words every day. Well, I have a job and family and things going on. So for me, sometimes I have to accept that I won't get 2,000 words done every day. That's my goal that I like to have. As long as I get some writing done, 500, maybe it's 1,000, whatever the word count is. But I do try to write every single day. Mm, I do actually. And then I read also a lot in the evenings. I kind of feel like for me, my imagination, creativity, whatever you want to say, I kind of compare it to your body. For our body to be healthy, we have to have nutrition and we have to have exercise, right? And with my imagination, the nutrition is writing and reading is the exercise. So, or sorry, it's the other way around. But anyway, but I need both. And also too, for me, I know some people go, well, what about writer's block? Like, don't you ever struggle when you don't have a project or anything like that? And of course, there are days when I don't have a project. But what I like to do then is, don't be afraid to have what I like to call BS writing days. So basically, meaning what you're writing doesn't have to be published. It doesn't have to be beautiful. Just write something. Like go start with the alphabet and go like A is for I'm absolutely bored right now. I'm so bored. I'm staring at my computer and I can't take it anymore. And B is for boring, boring. Oh, this is so boring. And just keep going through the alphabet until you get to your word count or, come up with some writing prompts or, go online and find writing prompts. But just realize that doing it every day is what matters and keeps the discipline going. And you want to do it until, of course, it becomes so ingrained that, that you almost have to do it. But I also think you need, as much as people talk about discipline, I also think you also need to enjoy it. I mean, yeah, writing and editing is work, but it's still enjoyable. And so that also comes in mind too when I mentioned editing. That's a big thing too. I know with a lot of authors, they hate the process of editing, you know, but I've always said, I always look at with athletes, those who really enjoy or become really great at their job are the ones who hate what everyone or love what everyone else hates. And with authors, that's with editing. There's so much good stuff with editing, trying to figure out how to reshape it, how to build it. It takes away that delusion you have when you first were writing the first draft thinking, "Oh, this is the greatest thing I ever wrote." And then, 2 drafts later and you're like, "What the heck was I thinking?" It gives you a chance to be brave and be able to tear apart what you spent time in and you get to reshape it. And also too, with every single book I've written at least, and every time I've gone through the editing process, I've been able to slowly see how I've gotten better as an author. Because like I had mentioned, I took a good chunk of time off in my life and I had to kind of start all over. So it gives me the really strength to keep going, but that's only because I'm trying to love the process. I'm trying to love everything about the process, and, that's my other helpful hint for maintaining discipline.
You seem
Yeah,
to
you
have
just gotta do it.
a great bit of routine advice, in my opinion.
Also, too, with editing, I'm the type of person I do 3 drafts, so I have my first draft, and then I do 3 edits, and then I give it to my editor. I give it to someone else to look at. I remember hearing a person tell me once they did, like, 60 edits on their manuscript. I'm like, "60?" I'm like, "Holy cow, like, what?" Like, "No, do, like, 3 and then give it to someone else." 'Cause for me anyway, after 3, I don't see anything anymore, if that makes sense. I don't see the issues. I don't see nothing, so I need fresh eyes.
Of course, absolutely get that, and I am a fan of revise your manuscript 3 times yourself before you hand it over to someone else every time. You'll be surprised what happens when you do that, but there's also a thing called overkill.
Yeah.
I think that we sometimes have to learn that the hard way, though, depending on the writer.
Absolutely.
So, what have been some of the most affirming or surprising moments that you've experienced since you published your work?
Let's see. Well, so starting way in the beginning, like when I mentioned my first book, Commune, it was getting when it was getting professionally edited, the editor didn't have a lot of experience in that field. So she told me she gave it to, and I can't remember his full name. I remember his first name was Larry, last name I don't remember. So I apologize to Larry. But Larry had a lot of experience with editing in the New York market, like, like real big time market. And he edited it for her as a favor. And I remember him sending me the draft and then having this really nice detailed letter with it. And part of what the letter said was, you have a really good ability of putting in the story what needs to be done or needs to be said, and then leaving out the stuff that no one needs to know about. And that takes a lot of talent, and it's not something you can teach. It just authors either have it or they don't. And so that was my first real affirmation where it's like, oh, okay, wow, okay, I'm good at this. This is awesome, lovely, sweet, wonderful. And then, down the road, it's just been, people either telling me they enjoy my writing or they enjoy my stories. And then my current editor, telling me I, I use my editors a lot because I feel like that's where the affirmation comes from a lot of times, even though they also tear your soul apart with red ink and also take you down. There's a lot of times, I always love it when they'll leave a comment that says, "Ooh, I love this description," right? "Ooh, I love this line," or "Ooh, I love this." And, you know, that's helpful for me just to keep my head in check. Because sometimes you know how it is. Sometimes you think, man, am I really that good? Am I really doing anything worth caring about? And then the next thing I would also say is, like I kind of mentioned before, when I did my very first book, Immune, then my second book was The Interim. And eventually, long story short, I wound up getting the rights to 3 of my books, Midglow, Interim, and Immune, back this summer through a long process, which we don't have time to get into, but I got the rights back. And I also at that time was ready to publish Question 17, which is my 4th book. And that's when I was like, "Okay, well, I wanna republish all 4, but obviously I don't have 3 grand to spend on each book, or 4 grand is sometimes how it costs." And then I found, like I said, Ingram Sparks self-publishing, which was awesome, sweet. But before I republished them, I went through all my books again. I went through, like, the interim, and I saw right away the mistakes and things that I hadn't seen when I first wrote it. Because like I said, I forgot a lot about fiction writing. Like, one of the things I realized with the interim when I was going through it again, I did a really lousy job of saying who the main character was because there were so many characters. You wouldn't really have known who the main character was, so I had to shift it. And so going over those books again this summer was a lot of affirmation because I just could see how much I'd grown in, the 7, 8 years since I've written that one, and the same with Immune and Midglow as well. Those are all surprising moments.
Well, congratulations on getting your rights back. I too have a similar story on that note that took me a while, but it's always nice when you finally get it done.
Yeah. And then back to your thick skin, I did the mistake of publishing them all in, like, a 2-month span, and I remember the minute I advertised it on Facebook, someone said, "Oh, I went online, and it says they've all been published in 4 months, so it must be AI writing." And I'm like, "No."
I had someone try to do that to me on a piece that was written well before the advent of AI, and I pushed back. I won't even lie. I straight up told
Yeah,
her, I said, "You can go ahead and leave my reader group. You don't belong here. Everybody here that's been following me since the day I published a book knows that this book was written like 2015. That was 10 years ago. AI was not even a blip on the radar."
right? I know. I was annoyed too. I'm like, "Really?" It's like, well, I guess I should have spread it out a little bit, the republishing, but
But
whatever.
yeah, I don't take those allegations, like, lightly. If you say that and I know it's not true, I'll straight up and I loved the author that actually just sued someone over that because it really is libel and defamation. If you don't have proof, just because you suspect it is, doesn't give you the right to go and try to ruin someone's career.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how do you hope that your writing shifts the way society views creativity, myth, and legacy?
Well, I think for starters, I think, we've already been kind of talking about it where technology and society is just going in such a direction where creativity isn't really celebrated much anymore. It's not really, um, yeah, people don't really either don't have the time or they don't care about the importance of having creativity, and not even just with writing in general, but the arts and drawing and doing all those things. Like I heard a good person once say, I don't want all these robots and technology to write my book. I want them to do my chores so I can write my book and give me time to it. And yeah, I think, as a society, we need the arts, we need creativity, we need that ability, even if you don't wanna do it for a living, you should at least do do it on the side just to take care of you, just from a mental health standpoint and a, self-care standpoint, just taking care of yourself, and I hope we don't, as a society, lose sight of that. I think that's kind of one of my worries sometimes is we are just gonna get to this point where we don't care anymore. Like, we don't have band anymore in school. I mean, we're already taking away half the trades in school. It's like, geez, so I'd say that's the big thing is let's not forget the importance of it.
And I think post COVID, because we've seen how much creativity, arts, and I mean, even things like Zoom being used, the way that people were trying to connect more than anything, what kept them to be able to stay sane during those crazy times was arts, books, and all of these
Uh-huh.
things that stem from creativity. So it really is important that we don't undermine the fact that I don't want it to become a Wally world. I don't know if anybody
Right.
remembers that Disney cartoon, but that's what we're going to be looking at if we don't keep it at the forefront of our minds that humanity and creativity are literally the things that led us to becoming innovative and learning how to invent. And so all these technological advances started with someone having a creative spark somewhere. So if we allow technology to rule over that, we're going to be undoing our own selves.
Agree.
And I think that's very under talked about right now. For listeners who may be struggling with isolation, illness, or creative doubt, what message of hope would you want to share with them?
What I'd say is don't let whatever's going on in your life, don't let it consume you to the point where you forget that, you can always use your struggles and challenges to make it better. Just because we struggle doesn't mean we can't learn from it. I'm a very much, and I'll admit by fault, maybe sometimes not a good thing, but I'm very solution based. It's okay to have your ups and your downs, but don't let it control you either. There's that great saying, our feelings lie to us sometimes. They're not facts always. So you got to learn to not always believe them. And sometimes, you just got to not take yourself so serious either. Don't take there's always someone who's gonna have it harder than you as well. I always try to remember, there's someone in this world who would give up everything for the chance to have the life I'm living. So sometimes you gotta have humility and gratitude and remind yourself like, I still can achieve what I'm able to, and I don't need to have excuses or I don't need to play the victim role for too long. Um, I've been raised never to have the victim role mentality too much, and so for me, and then if you don't have that ability or if you don't think you are and you're struggling with it, I'm still a huge advocate for ask for help, ask for support, especially, being a male in the field I work with, men are really taught not to struggle. And I wish we had more awareness with men's mental health and how it affects society in general. Because we talk a lot about, well, when women hurt, this is what happens. I'm like, yeah, well, when men hurt, this is what happens too. There's a dual relationship. We can't just focus on one and the other. But anyway, so yeah, that would be my message. Just ask for help if it's too serious. I mean, you feel you can't do it, but then also try to not let it defy you as well. And then also learn from it, use it. Like I just mentioned, I struggled from some secondary trauma from the field I worked in. And that's why I was writing the book I'm currently working on. That healed me. Find stuff to heal. You'd be surprised how many coping skills and hobbies and strategies there are. I think the biggest thing too, as adults, I don't know about you, but have you ever been on the phone talking to someone and you're giving them this great advice and then you hang up and you go, "Man, that's good stuff. Why don't I do that?" We
Ew. I
We are
used to be like
terrible at following our yeah, we're terrible at following our own advice. That's the other
not
thing. Follow
anymore
your own
for
advice.
me, though. Like, I not anymore for me. I have definitely evolved since I turned 40 to go, like, "You know what? This is stuff that's obviously coming from me. It's innately part of who I am. It's time for me to acknowledge that and live it because it's my authenticity." And I think that's really important. And also, what you said about men is important. I am the mother of 4 children, and 2 of my sons are in their 20s. My oldest daughter is in her 20s. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. And I have always looked at it like it is my responsibility to raise these young men to be emotionally intelligent as much
Mhm.
as intellectually intelligent as it is for my daughter. And I have done everything I can as a mother who had children in my obviously very young age to ensure that my children were resilient in the fact of knowing that it's okay to have bad emotions. It's okay to feel those things and that it is not gender specific. We are human beings and we all have emotions.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I think that that's definitely something that therapy and people need to start realizing. It's okay to cry. It's okay for men to have breakdowns. It's okay for them to have the same kind of emotional, visceral response that a woman may have to what is negative stimuli. And we just have to come to accept that as a society and stop denigrating men when they do show those emotions because that's the reason why they become closed up and women are like, why can't I communicate with this man? It's like he's a
Mhm.
brick wall. Well, it's because raising that person up, they were taught that that's how they're supposed to behave, and in order to undo that we have to teach them that that's not the way they're supposed to behave.
Yep, and in the same token, need to teach not to put us back in it when we do.
Exactly.
I've ruffled some feathers over the years of suggesting to a few female coworkers. I'm like, "Well, what's your part in having them closed off?" And they're almost offended, like, "Well, what do you mean?" And it's like, "Well, maybe there's something you do too. Like, you never know. Men do it to each other as well, though. But yeah,
Yes,
for
yes,
sure.
and it's really so that they don't have to deal what they perceive to be less emasculating and uncomfortable, but the reality is all that really does is bury it, and it comes out in other very negative ways, and that's the reason why it's important that we look at things, and that's why I'm saying right now, as a woman who has had children, I recognize that, and I decided, that's not the way my children are gonna be raised. They're going to be raised to understand that it's okay to have feelings, and we're going to learn how to deal with those feelings as they arise in the most appropriate ways. And I think that therapy really helped me there. And that's why I was talking about how I came back into my authenticity because
Mhm,
I'd say things like this, but I didn't feel like it was resonating with myself. And now I'm at a stage where I finally said, but it can resonate with me. I have reached the level of healing where I can recognize that, again, this is innate to me. All I have to do is be empowered by what I already know. That being said, what projects, manuscripts, or expansions are you most excited about right now?
So right now I have one book that is I sent to my editor that's in the process of going through that revision. And I'm hoping so it's called The Conwood Prestige. It's a straight horror novel. I'm not gonna lie. It's about a man named Eugene, and he goes back to his hometown in Michigan to help his grandfather take care of Eugene's father, whose health is declining very quickly and mysteriously. And while he's at home, he gets re in touch with an organization that all three of them are members of, and it's called the Albatross. And they control all the power and prestige, not only in the town, but in the counties around them and surrounding areas and so forth. And eventually, a few members start dying. There's some murders and mystery behind it, and of course he gets sucked into the whole story, and I'm very excited for it because it's a great story. I feel like I did a lot of probably my best work just in regards of suspense and actual scary moments and all of that. And that's the one I mentioned earlier about trying to go the traditional route. I really want that one to go the traditional route. So I'm really going to push for it. And I know it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of time, and a ton of rejections. I have my thick skin ready to go for all the rejections because I know query letters is tough, but that's the one I'm most excited for. And then after that, well, I'm still working on the one I talked about earlier, Figment of Caring with the mental health field. That one I'm really excited for, but it's still because no one really, especially in the horror field, when you talk about institutions and residential centers. It's all none of it's really very accurate to how the field really is. So that's why I'm excited for that book, is because I hope it gets out and people read it and go, yeah, you can clearly tell the difference.
Finally, what do you envision for the future of your writing and the communities that it touches?
I mean, so for me, I mean, just being able to do it for a living full time is really the goal and the dream. I mean, obviously, I can do it even not full time and make the money because I do it for joy, and I can do it for the rest of my life for joy. But obviously, being able to do it for a living would be just as good. And then, so for me, just building that community that shares the same, for me, the same open mindedness just about life and society and in general, and not be so closed minded and just kind of trapped in their own little world. I don't have time for that. I like positive communities, and I just hope at some point they resonate with one of the stories. They don't have to resonate with all of them, but at least we can build that positive community with each other.
Absolutely. Seth, thank you for sharing your journey, your wisdom, and your vision with us today. Your work reminds us that storytelling is not only about imagination, it's about resilience, healing, and legacy. To our listeners, may you carry forward the inspiration Seth has offered us today and remember that creativity is a form of empowerment. Until next time, this has been This Mind of Sai Marie.